part-time representative for American River College, Beth Verhey, I am delighted and proud to welcome you to our part-time to tenure track hiring workshop. It's a great resource for part-timers who want to learn the ins and outs of the often challenging process of getting a full-time job at Los Rios. And I thank our panel for bringing their expertise, and I thank all of you for coming. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our LRCFT president, Orny Limini-Pursuit.
Hi, thank you for coming. First of all, before we start, I would like to thank all the panelists here, especially Lisa, who has a very busy schedule and still made time to come here. And she does so every year, for how long now, for quite a while. Let's go around the room and have you introduce yourself. So my name is Orny Limini-Pursuit at KGSL. I'm also the faculty union president for ARC.
Okay, I'm Ray Teray. Actually still going to Sac State to get the T-cell degree. So this is my last semester, and currently I work at the ESL lab.
Oh, are we going that way?
Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Shannon Wong-Lerner, and I'm in speech communication, and I also help with the PRIZE program for Pacific Islander and Southeast Asian students.
Great, thank you for coming.
My name is Anna Hoffman, and I teach for the foreign languages department in Spanish.
Thank you for coming.
My name is Jim Lin. I teach physics. I'm teaching physics in physics department. Science and engineering department. Sorry.
My name is Julie Casperson Schultz, and I'm an ESL instructor and adjunct tutor center coordinator.
My name is Renata Lansky. I am a work experience instructor at Sacramento City College in Los Angeles, and I'm classified here as an internship developer here at American River College.
Thank you.
My name is Lee Miranda, and I'm an adjunct counselor here.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. And so now I'm going to go. Beth, sorry. Alba.
My name is Alba Boyer, and I teach Italian and Spanish here at American River.
Thank you, Alba. So why don't we go to panelists and then have them introduce themselves. Here's our agenda, if this thing works. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Lawrenson, and I serve as the Vice President of Instruction here at American River College.
Hi, I'm Tak Leon. I teach computer information science classes.
I'm Tony Barcelos. I'm a former part-time instructor at CRC.
40 years ago. Well, 30 some years ago. But he still remembers his part-time years.
I'm Stephen Boyd. I'm the Dean of Behavioral and Social Sciences.
I'm Rina Roy, Dean of Science and Engineering. Welcome.
So the next thing we'll do is we'll ask Lisa to please give you an overview of the hiring process, faculty hiring process at ARC. And so let's give Lisa a hand.
I'll just stand up so I can see you. This is the teacher in me never dies. So although I serve as the Vice President of Instruction here at AR, I've served as an administrator on the campus. I'm in my 14th year as an administrator here. But before that, I was a professor of humanities and multicultural humanities and English composition. So I was a tenured faculty member at a different institution for 12 years. So I have that teaching background as well, so I understand the things that you're trying to do in the classroom and your goal of being a full-time faculty member. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about the process for hiring, give you a sense of how the process works, where do the positions come from, what happens in the first round, what happens in the second round, who makes up the committees, and the experience of these folks here who have, several of them have served as adjuncts and then received full-time positions, and some of the tips and advice that they have that can help you in the interview process as well. So, so how many of you know where the faculty positions come from? Or what that process is? Does anybody know?
As far as expansion or replacement or might have along those lines. Someone's got magic that make the money just appear.
Right. level, they'll get their budget from the state, and sometimes there's money in the state budget for growth positions. And then they do their magic through the formulas of the 4 colleges, and they'll make a determination of which college gets a certain amount of positions. And that's done basically based on our enrollment and other needs of the college. The second part of that process would be replacement positions. So anybody who retires, then we are eligible for a replacement position. However, let's say somebody retires in a field that, let's say, is declining. Let's say enrollment's declining for whatever reason. This has certainly happened over the years. That position then might not come back as, for discipline X. It may come back as a position in another area that's growing. Does that make sense? So it's not an automatic replacement for the exact same position. So we go through a process, and the first thing that happens is department chairs are given, they go ahead, and they're going through that process right now, actually, of saying, we would like to have a replacement position or a growth position. And they can also ask for both, which they do as well in some cases. So they might ask for 2 or 3 positions. All those positions then come to the vice president's office, we send it to the research office, and then they do their magic with all the data to find out what's happening with the ratios for adjunct to full-time professors, and we're trying to keep that ratio. Do you know what that number, what the target number is for those ratios? It's 75-25. And the reason I want to focus on that, it's really important for you to know that in California, that's something that is really unique to California. When I worked in Washington State, our ratio there was 90% adjunct to 10% full-time. And I'd like people to know that, to give you a sense of the difference, okay? Because for adjuncts there, I never served as an adjunct. The idea there was like, if you're an adjunct, you'll never be a full-timer. And it was terrible. And so when I came here and I thought, wow, we have preference, we have, this is really a gateway in. I think that's really important, and I just want you to know that because I think that's something unique to California, and it bodes well because many of our faculty who serve as full-timers also served as adjuncts previously, so just thought you might want to know that piece. So anyway, back to the story. We go through that process, so gather up all the data, the departments get their data, and they write up their rationale. They go to the Senate, the faculty Senate. They have their own conversation, and they rank the positions in the Senate. So let's say there are 20 positions, they rank them from 1 to 20 as a group. Meanwhile, the area deans, we do the same thing. So they bring their rationale to the dean's table, we hear each other's rationale for the positions, and then we do a ranking that is, it's not like a raising of hands, it is a, what's the word I'm looking for? Anonymous vote. So they do a ballot vote, that comes to me, and then I take that list to the college president, and the college president then, in conjunction with the academic senate, will come to a decision about the 2 lists to make the final list. Does that make sense? And then all the positions would be ranked accordingly. Typically, those lists are not too far apart, but sometimes they are. And so the discussion needs to happen as to why is it that this particular position, what were the arguments? And it might be that maybe the faculty member got sick that day when presentations were at Senate and somebody else came in at the last minute, maybe it wasn't a great presentation. It could be for a variety of reasons. So we just talk that through, and then we have that list. The next thing that happens is, let's go back now, we have 20 positions and they're ranked. I then have to go to the district office and compete against the other 3 vice presidents for the positions. So we have that same process at district. And I do want you to know, I'm describing ARC's local process. Each of the 4 colleges has its own process, and it's slightly different. So I want you just to know that that's specific to our campus. So then, when I go to our chancellor's office, we have to go through and make the same rationale. So at that point, I'm going, okay, I have to fight for the ESL position, or fight for the Spanish position, or the speech communications position, or whatever it is. And I'm doing that based on the rankings from both the Senate and the President. Okay. The other colleges are doing the same thing. And at that point, I'm given a number, which would include the number of replacement positions and growth positions. So let's say my number happened to be 12. And maybe CRC was given a number of 8. But maybe they only got 6 requests for positions. So then there are 2 that are up for grabs. Or maybe we all have more positions than we had allocated to us, so we have to kind of battle for that. And part of that, and when I say battle, that's kind of strong, but it can be that way. Trying to convince district office that our speech communications position is more important than CRC's welding position, right? And so you get the idea. And part of that, there's strategy involved for sure. So I try to figure out where that line is. My personal strategy is to try to figure out where the line will be. Let's say if we have 10 positions. When I'm looking at getting 11 and 12, I want to make sure that those positions are really positions that I can make a good argument for, right? As opposed to like a third English position. They might go, oh, well, you've got 2, so why do you need a third? But if I'm asking for a position that it's a one-person department, that's a good argument, right? Or that we have growing industry in that area, those types of things. So I'm just giving you kind of a sense of it. Then we worked it out at district, they give us our allocation, and so far, in the past couple of years, I've been able to secure more positions than we were allocated, so that's good. So that's been positive, because that's my goal when we need to do that. That's where the positions come from, because you might wonder when all the announcements come out in early January, February, where did these come from? Who decided? I thought somebody left my department, how come there's no position? That's the process. And in some cases, departments will not ask for a replacement position. We went through this with the math department as an example. During AB 705, they didn't want to hire math professors right at that minute because they were redesigning the curriculum. They weren't sure of the impact on what would happen with enrollment. It wasn't a time to bring in a whole bunch of new faculty on top of that. So then they ended up going through that process a semester later and asking for some positions. But at that moment, they weren't comfortable moving ahead with that. So there can be for all types of reasons. Some departments try to ask for growth positions, but it's really an early replacement. So for example, in nursing that happens because it's very difficult to train a new nurse, so they try to get a growth position, and then when the person leaves, they don't replace the person because they kind of try to do it on the front end. Does that make sense? So certain disciplines use that argument. So that gives you a sense of how that whole process works. We then take the list of positions, and then the committees are put together, and the committees for first round are generally run by our Associate Vice Presidents of Instruction. Holly's one of those who serves that. Welcome, Holly. And then Kate Jaques and Frank Kobayashi. So they call together the committees. The committee members are Senate appointed for each department. And I will say the district recently went through a change in their process because they're trying to diversify the hiring committee. So now that process is kind of morphing, but generally speaking, a department would get together and say, this is the committee that we would like to have. District has to approve that committee, and the committee is always made up of the constituency group involved. That will be the majority vote on the committee. So for faculty, there are more faculty than there are administrators. On an administrative committee, there are more administrators than faculty. Does that make sense? And staff is the same thing. So the committees are put together, and they're brought together, and before they see any applications at all, they create a list of criteria, they create a list of questions, they talk about their interests in the position, and then they look at the job description, because the questions have to be, I shouldn't say the questions, sorry, the criteria for ranking the applications is based on the job description. And tell me why that would be.
So you get the right person. You don't want to start asking questions and looking for qualifications for X if you're hiring for Y.
Exactly. So let's say that, for example, I'm hiring an English teacher, and maybe I need expertise in poetry, but I don't tell anybody, but that's what I'm screening for. And you might, as an applicant, have that background, but because it wasn't asked for, you're not highlighting that in your application. So the screening criteria have to be based on the job description. That's important for you to know, because when you're applying, the job description is what your application will be screened based on. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that you're customizing it. And I would say this is true for any position that you apply to, either here at American River, hopefully that would be the place, but anywhere in Los Rios or other colleges in the area as well. So really customize your application materials to that job description. And the more you do that, the better. Make certain when you're writing a letter, if you're using a letter that you've crafted and you're applying to multiple positions, double and triple check to make sure that you haven't put Deer Lake Tahoe Community College and submit it to American River. Because how many of you have seen that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And guess what? Right then, you have made a terrible impression, and you might be kicked out of the pool. So meaning by somebody screening might say, well, you don't even know what you're applying for. So you don't want to go down on a technicality like that. So make sure you check your materials very carefully. So those are the screening criteria, and then the questions are crafted as well based on the interests of the committee. Once all of that is approved by HR, that's when the committee is then released to the applicant pool is then released to the committee. So they will never know who's applied until the screening criteria and the questions have been created. And so I want you to know that, because that's one of the protections that we have, as opposed to if a person, Paulie applies to the position and I don't really want him to have the job, then I could be writing questions or things that are going to reveal that he has some skills that I don't want, right? Or I'm gonna ask for things that I know he doesn't have. So this way, at the front end, we don't know who's in the pool, and that all the questions and criteria are based on what the joint interests are of the group. So that's kind of the general process. Then once the applications are screened, we go through a process, and then the top candidates are selected. That is done through an anonymous process, so it's not like a group discussion of, oh, did you like Joey? Yes, I did. It's not like that. It's a numerical process that only the chair and the equity representative will see. They rank the highest candidates, and those are the people who are invited in. If, let's say, there were a top 13 candidates and you were looking for 10, but number 10, 11, and 12 were in a tie, you would invite those folks as well. In some cases, you might invite 20 people if you're hiring for 3 positions, because if people drop out of the race and so on, you want to make sure you have a good pool. Generally speaking, for one position, it's around 10 people that are invited, more or less, just to give you a sense of your competition. So if you get invited in for an interview, for some of our positions, for English, for counseling, there could be well over 100, 150 candidates in any pool. And so if you've been invited in, you've already really demonstrated that you have good skill. If you're invited for any interview, it means your paper packet's looking good, you've done that front end part. If you're not getting invited for the interview, that should be a clue to you that you want to sit down with another coworker, somebody who might not be on the committee that you can sit down and discuss this with, a department chair, somebody to look over your materials to help you to see if there's something you can highlight that you didn't. If you've been in the tutoring lab, if you've done volunteer work, but it's related to your discipline, include those things. Don't think that that doesn't count. I know when I applied originally, I thought, well, I was just in a tutoring lab, a computer lab, I guess that doesn't really count. But that was exactly what was needed for the first job I got, was to teach composition in a computer lab. So if I hadn't put that, I might not have gotten the position. That was a long time ago, so that was important and not so much now. Anyway. So then, and then Ornit's put up here the sample screening criteria. The kinds of things that we're looking for can vary, but it's based on your experience in the classroom. It might be your academic background, your training. So if you have certificates or you've done other professional development, please include that information. Because a lot of times we'll say educational training and background, which includes, for example, if you have an online teaching, the OGI certificate, you want to put that in there because that's an additional credential. Then, once we invite you in for the interview, you would receive a notification and you will be expected to do some kind of demonstration. For counseling, oftentimes that might be a role play with a student. It can vary based on the committee, but generally for classroom positions, and sometimes in counseling they'll have like an HCD one as well, the Human Career Development, but you would have a teaching demonstration, and generally that's about 10 minutes long. Often the teaching demos, they might ask you, how would you teach this concept? Pretty much it's pretty tough to teach anything in 10 minutes, so understand that the committee is not expecting you to get all the way through the quantum mechanics in 10 minutes or whatever it is that has been brought forward. I'll just use my discipline, that would probably be better, but if we're talking about a thesis statement, I could describe the general concept or an approach, but to really get into that in 10 minutes is going to be tough. But what you can do is talk about scaffolding. What led up to that point in the lesson? Where are you starting now? What would you do for homework, or what's going to happen next? Demonstrate to them what your approach would be. Okay, you could certainly give handouts as well that might cover, here's a reminder of what we did yesterday. We only have 10 minutes today to meet. Here's what we'll be doing tomorrow, or whatever. But recognize that we are not in a situation as committee members thinking, you didn't do it in 10 minutes. It's not a race to get through the content. You need to focus and do what you can within that. Explain that next time you'll cover these other aspects that are critical to it. And they'll talk more about the demo, some tips for that, but you would definitely have a demo. Tell me what other kinds of questions you could expect for first round.
What do you want to teach at LRC?
That's a crucial one, very crucial. Where I see candidates go awry here is I've seen candidates talk about that question for 20 minutes in a 50-minute interview, okay? You remember that you'll have about 10 questions in an interview situation, so you want to engage your time carefully and lay it out so that you're not spending 20 minutes on the first question and then you have to rush through your teaching demo because you talked about, your graduate school experience too long. So practice those answers and know, and then it's usually the two-part question, why are you the best candidate for this job and why do you want to be here? A lot of people answer the why do you want this job, but they forget the part about ARC. And for any school that you're applying to, it's important to do your research and know the curriculum. It's disturbing to me when I'm interviewing somebody and they say, oh, do you have a class in, I'm thinking, didn't you look at the catalog? Right? If you're interested in being a member of the department, you should be looking at the courses offered, you should be looking at the degrees in that program, you should have some sense of who the college is, or don't say something like, do you have a tutoring center? You should say, well, I know you have an LRC. Something like that to demonstrate your homework. So do your homework, and then that can be part of your answer as to why you want to be at the college. Could be for a variety of reasons. You're teaching here currently, and you can capitalize on that. But don't make the mistake of, oh, you all know me. I've been here for 10 years teaching. That's the worst thing you can do. Even if Collie is applying for a position, and he's been here for a while now, he should come into the room as if we've never seen him before. It's really important. We cannot assume for Collie that we know things, but we have two other candidates who are outside people because that wouldn't be fair to them. So you're ranked based on what you're saying in that room. So even if he had 25 years of educational experience, if he doesn't tell me, I can't give him any credit for that. And I've seen candidates do that. So it's really important that even if you know them, don't get too comfortable. Act like they're strangers and tell them your information. Then you go through that process, and there are other questions would be, you'll definitely have an equity question or multiple questions that focus on equity. Okay, so you'll want to be thinking about that. I would say a question to ponder for yourself is if you're looking at meeting all of the students' needs in your discipline, and if you have disproportionately impacted students, how are you going to meet their needs? What specifically are you doing in the classroom? Because that's going to be true for any discipline. It might be a variety of different populations, right? It might be, maybe there's DI for veterans in your discipline. What are you doing to meet that population's needs? DSPS, could be African American and Latinx students, Native American, whatever. Just think about what you're doing to meet the needs of those populations. Then you go through the process and you leave, and then if you don't get called for a second round, that doesn't mean you failed. The candidates who come in, I rarely see a candidate who I'm thinking, why on earth did we ask this person here? It's never like that. Everybody's really solid. So if you don't get called in for the second round, it just means that it was a very competitive committee, and you might have been some of the people in the room's top choice. It's not like it's unanimous, and I can tell you that having chaired committees, it's often split. So maybe Tony really loved you, but 3 other people ranked you at 4th place, and then you didn't get to move forward. So, just use the experience to inform you for the next time. But if you are called back in, that's also really a great compliment to you. And if you're not successful in the second round, I've had people decide then they're not going to apply again. Oh, well, they don't want me. That's the worst thing you could do, because the people who are finalists, the decision making, since I'm one of those decision makers, it's like paper thin between Collie and candidate X. So, so many times, like, I want to chase the person out the door and say, we really like you. I wish we had 2 positions, but we don't. So that means you have made it all the way up there to being one of the top 2 or 3 people. You should definitely get back in and apply again. Absolutely. You did a whole bunch of things right. Your paper was good. Your interviews were good. It just means that it's a matter of time before you get that position. So you want to keep pushing. Don't take that as a rejection. Yeah.
I was wondering about contacting whomever was the head of the hiring, or whomever you spoke to, whether it was the dean or the chair, and just asking them for feedback. Have you ever heard of anyone doing that before?
I have, and where our district is at this point is it's really a challenge. I'll say, having chaired those committees and also serving as vice president, because people can come in and say to me, and I've had those conversations. Collie might say, how did I do? And I'll go, well, I thought you were great. I'm only speaking for myself. You did a great job, but you didn't really talk about your teaching background very much. He goes, but I did. I talked about it. And so that's kind of, because how you think you did versus how the committee heard you and experienced you might be different. So I've had that conversation a few times with folks who say, but I did do that. I'm thinking, you asked me for feedback, I'm giving it.
What if someone was receptive and wanted to listen. Have you had that happen before?
I have, but what I would say is, in the situation, for example, there might be, maybe colleague has expertise, and I'm hiring for ESL, and he has a speaking and listening background, but I really need a composition teacher. He's just not the right person for the department at the right time. But in a hiring situation, a lot of what we're doing is confidential. So it can vary, and there are absolutely variables. You know, I've worked with various presidents here at the college because I was with David Bayar, and then we had multiple interims, Pam Walker, and Marie Smith, and Bill Carnes, and I went through hiring with all of those folks. What they're interested in and looking for is different. And, you know, the vice president of instruction, that's me now, but in the past, that person had some different things that they were looking for. Ornette?
Shannon, I think if you are asking about a specific interview, that's the situation. But if you say, in general, what would be a good way to interview well, that's something that the panel will give you today.
Sure.
And you're more than happy to call me.
Oh,
and
no, I
I'll
was
be-
just curious, after you've gone through the first round, or
Right.
even the second round, if that was helpful at Los Rios to do that. I was just curious, because, yeah, in my field, I do communication coaching and business coaching, so that's something I always tell clients, but I'm just trying to navigate this.
Right. And it's kind of worked over time, just because in the past, HR used to be willing to sit down with people, they look comprehensively at the feedback. HR has moved away from that now, so I would say it's kind of, what Ornette's saying, it's more about getting the general feel of it, but
Thank you.
the other part I would say what's really, really important is do an analysis of your own interview. That's important, your own self-awareness. Really ask yourself, how did I do on those questions? Did I prepare well enough? Was I watching the room when I gave my demo? Was I losing people? You know, did you practice enough? All of those things. And then at the end of the day, you know, there's only one person who's going to get the job, or two people who will get the job. And so when you're up at that level, you're already very competitive. That's why I say, if you've gotten in the door, you have beat out a whole bunch of people. And I will tell you, working in Los Rios and working at ARC, it's an extremely competitive environment. If you are mobile and you're having trouble getting into the system, sometimes, you know, teaching somewhere else for a bit and then coming back with some experience. Because we hire people, I'll use the math department. We just hired somebody last round who was a tenured faculty member at CRC for how long? I think like 12, 14 years, something like that. So we had also outstanding professors in that pool, but they're competing against somebody who's already been tenured in Los Rios, right? And then coming back to it. That's pretty tough competition. I'm just using that as an example. That's not always the case, but it doesn't mean that the other people weren't qualified or excellent. It just means we only had so many positions.
And in that same pool, we hired someone fresh out of grad school.
Yep.
So we hired a very experienced former professor from within the district. And we hired a new instructor with very little experience who did such a good job that we hired that person fresh out of grad school. So anything can happen.
And I'd say that in the last spring, those committees were extremely competitive. It was probably the toughest decision-making that I've ever been through with Thomas. It was very, very hard. Not easy at all.
One of the other things I'd recommend is that after that first round interview, do a self-postmortem. In fact, go through and think about the questions that were asked, because there's a through line that runs through the whole process. And if you see the questions that were asked, or you kind of feel what you might have answered well or not answered well, that'll probably come back in the second round. So identifying those elements and then kind of tooling that for the next round can be really valuable, because it shouldn't be a surprise. We're not, things aren't going to come out of the blue for this type of stuff. That'll give you a clue as to what the college might be looking for after that first round.
So in the second round, we'll talk about that now. So then the top candidates from that initial 10, let's say, are selected, and it's 3 candidates for faculty. If it's more than one position being hired in a department, then it's 5 positions, I think, or 5 people move forward. Sometimes it might be 3 or 4 that get sent forward, depending on how the scores came out. If we have, I'll give you an example. Committee last semester, the top 5 people were 1 point apart. So I didn't say, okay, let's just go with the top 3. When I looked at the rankings, of course the people in the committee don't know that, and I said, I just want to share something with you. The committee is 1 point apart, each of you, and I said, so that means that your top person is somebody's bottom person and vice versa, and they were spread out all over the place. So we decided to invite in the top 5 people. seemed fair because they were all in there, right? And they were only a point apart. Other times it's spread out, so it's very clear. You might have a 13 and a 15 and an 18 and then like 25 and a 35, so it's pretty clear what to do, right? But in this instance, that seemed to be the fair thing, so it can vary. So second round is with the president, and if it's for an instructional position, then I am the vice president who's in those. If it's for counseling, then it's the vice president of student services. And then the area dean will be present, and frequently the chair of the committee if they're not chairing another committee, because they have a whole bunch of committees they're chairing. At any given time, we might have 22 or 23 positions we're going through in the hiring season. So that means Collie might be chairing 6 or 7 in addition to the multiple area deans that he is supervising, on top of scheduling, all these other things. So he's super busy, so he may or may not be there. And when you come into that interview, they will often say to you, well, this is not as formal as the first round. And when I applied for my position as Dean of Humanities, I was told that, so I really thought, oh, this isn't formal. It's formal. So I hate when they say that. So I think they're trying to make you feel relaxed, but make no doubt, it's still a competition. So this isn't a time to don your t-shirt, you know, it's a time to come in and present yourself as the professional you are, however you express that, because everybody does that a little bit differently. But know that you are competing against other people for the permanent job. It's not a one-person race, it's still a race, and so you want to make sure that you come in prepared for that. You may find that you're asked the same question. Why do you want this position, and why specifically the ARC? Please don't say, oh, I'm sorry, Collie, you heard this all in the first round. Just know that you have to start over again. Pretend again it's a whole new group, you've never seen Collie before, and start all over again. It's okay to use the same example you used in round 1 for round 2, if you thought it worked well. Or you might say, well, gosh, I have another example I can use. But don't think of, let's say like a question sometimes is, name somebody you've had a conflict with. Maybe there's one example you have that's really good that demonstrates your collaborative skills to work through a situation, and maybe you have another one that's not so good. Still use the really good one. It's okay to repeat it, so don't worry about that. I do see candidates doing that and trying to come up with another example, and I think, oh, that's not as good as the first one. And that's, so you don't want to choose your best stuff, okay? In that second round, the first round, you can't ask questions back and forth. So if you don't understand, if they ask you about andragogy and you don't know what that is, you can ask, but they're not going to answer you. They'll say, unfortunately, we can't answer, so you just have to answer the question. In the second round, you could ask that, and we will respond back to you. So you might say, well, what exactly do you mean by leadership in a classroom situation, or whatever it is? So it is more back and forth. So it's, from that standpoint, I would say it's a little less formal-esque, but it's still an interview process. I can't underscore that enough. And also, my goal as vice president in those, I have 3 to 5 excellent candidates. I'm trying to find the best person for our students. So I will ask follow-up question after follow-up question, because that's my job, is to get the information from you the best that I can while you're sitting there from me, right? So you might say, well, I have this extensive background with many different preps. I'm going to say, tell me about those. What have you taught? How, what's your favorite class to teach? And if there's something that you're not answering, maybe I've asked a question about equity that you haven't quite answered, I will ask it another way, and we'll ask it 3 or 4 ways until I get an answer, or I'll give up. But the point is, we can expect it to be that way. We're listening, and then we'll ask follow-up questions. And I ask a lot of follow-up questions, and the deans can attest to that in the second round interviews. It's not to grill you, it's because I'm trying to, this is my last chance to talk to you before I make a decision. Sometimes it will go to a third round, but that's extremely rare. But sometimes it will. If we just cannot decide, or we think we didn't ask the right question, we may set up a phone interview or go to a third interview. So if that happens to you, that's not, it means that the decision process is still happening. But that's rare. But should that happen to you, don't panic. It just means you're still in the race. It means you're not out of the race, okay? Because if you're not getting that call, that means you're out of the race. And then we'll tell you in that process that we'll be contacting you within a week or so. And Thomas and I try very hard to make the decisions, because I know that you may have other offers. We don't want to lose the best people, and I don't want to leave you hanging for 2 or 3 weeks wondering what's going on. You know, it's better to know right away if you're successful or not, just because it's helpful to you in terms of your own life and probably your heart rate as well, right? So we try to make that as simple and straightforward as possible. If you work within the district, if you're one of our adjuncts, I will personally call you and talk to you about it. And if I say something to you like, please, please, please apply again, I am telling you, you were outstanding. And I'm like begging you to apply again. Okay, so if you hear that from me, I'm giving you a definite head nod saying you were excellent. So if you get a call like that, just know that. Because, I hate those calls so much because in some cases I want to say, oh, you're like a paper shred away from being the person. So if you get that, I know it hurts, but don't take it personally and don't think that you've done something wrong. A lot of people think I failed. I didn't get the job and I failed. I can honestly say in second round, I don't think I've ever seen a candidate fail in second round, ever. Never. By the time they're there, they're outstanding candidates, and I'm looking at the deans and the AVPs, right? I mean, second round, people don't come in there and blow it. It's not like that. So be yourself would be my last piece, and then I'll be quiet and get off the floor here, but very important to bring your authentic self. Don't try to pretend to be somebody you're not. Be who you are, because nobody can bring what you can bring. Okay, so don't try to be what you think Kali wants, because you want to be who you are, and that way when you're hired, you get to be who you are. That's an important part, and that's what we mean about equity and inclusivity, that your voice and those things that make you you uniquely as a teacher, that's what you're bringing. And I will tell you, at this campus, I've hired people of definitely varying ages, people who are brand new out of graduate school. I think that particular candidate literally had graduated like on a Friday and interviewed on a Monday, like that kind of fresh out of graduate school. I've hired people who maybe have gone through the process as an adjunct internally 6 to 7 times before they were successful. So if you are not being successful, don't give up and don't take that as the door has closed in your face. I've hired people who thought that they would never ever get a job, that they aged out, and they thought they'd never get a job. I think of several people who said to me, like, they're like, are you serious? It's really me? And I'm like, yes, it's really you. So all of those things, I know we have those fears and concerns, but just know that just be yourself, bring your best stuff to the table, and also know that we're all rooting for you. As people who are internal to the college, you do a great deal for our students, for our district. We're rooting for you to do well, so just know that. And breathe, and if you make a mistake, just like you would in a classroom, it's not the end of the world. You say, oops, because what we'll say is, oh, they caught it, right? And I've seen this in math interviews, like, oh, they realized they made this miscalculation and they caught it. The catching it's more important than the fact that you made a mistake. I've seen people have their technology blow up during the interview, fire alarms go off. Sometimes that's the greatest blessing, because we go, wow, that person did not panic under pressure. Their whole PowerPoint, the whole system went down, but they stayed cool and calm, and that tells me in a classroom situation they're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys to add anything, and please bring all of your insights, because you guys have lots of insight.
Thank you, Lisa. So I am going to be your moderator, and we will, you have the sample interview question sheet. Feel free to go over the interview question sheet and see if you have specific questions that you want to ask. And we will give Lisa a break, and we'll go to Tuck and see if Tuck has something to share. We'll go through the panel lists in the front, and then we'll open up for any individual questions and comments.
Do I need to set a timer?
You have 1 second. No, go ahead.
I mean, really, do I need to be mindful of time, how much time?
Well, I think we want to share the air time, because I think everyone has
I know,
something to
that's
share.
fine.
Yeah, but no, I'm not going to count minutes.
Okay.
So did Todd use up his time just then?
Yes. May I ask one question, right? Okay, so I've been taking notes. Okay, so I think the whole process, starts with the job description. I understand that, since you, are in actual faculty, you already know, what the position is about, what the department is about, what courses are, what those courses are about. Read the description anyway. really carefully, pick up every single word, and so that you understand exactly what it is describing, okay? Because what you need to do is to find out exactly what you have done, and relate to what the job description is describing to your best ability. So make sure you do that carefully, because that is being used in the screening process, which is even before you get an interview. So you got to get through the screening process first, which means on paper, whatever you write in your resume and also in your cover letter is what the screening process is all about, and how you fill in the application. I have seen a lot of people forgetting to fill in like a portion of the application, filling it in incorrectly, without spell check and that sort of thing. So just spend a little bit more time and get that part done right first, okay? Because unless you get that part done first, correctly, you won't get an interview. Is that kind of it?
Absolutely. And the equity question, do you want to talk about that?
Equity question?
There's a diversity question on the application.
There's always an equity or diversity question. If you do not know what it's asking, look it up and research. Because as a written process, you have plenty of time to do that research. And that time is not going to be wasted, because you will need to know in the interview process as well.
And if there's this equity question, some people will say not applicable, or they'll just say, I love everyone. I mean, seriously. And I will tell you, that's a major criterion by which you're being evaluated on and screened on. And so for me, that's a deal breaker for several candidates. If they just write something like that, or, we're asking a serious question about equity and your commitment to equity and what you've done to demonstrate that in your, the personal things you do, the professional things that you do, so we want to hear about that. Yes?
Right. So I don't know how detailed you want us to write on the equity questions. For example, should it be 100 words, short, concise statements, or should I elaborate with more examples, etc.?
I've seen good ones that are a paragraph long, and I've seen good ones that are probably 2 pages long. It really depends on your style. So I wouldn't say it's so much a length as it is the quality of what you're saying. Talking at the 30,000 foot level, like I love all students and I love everybody, doesn't tell me a whole lot. But if you've been committed to, and saying that you're committed, give an example. I'm committed to working with all students in my classroom, and here's a way that I demonstrate that. Something like that would help a lot, because we're just trying to see, do you understand what equity is and how it plays out in the classroom situation. So that could be short or long, but that's something that even now, when we're not hiring at the moment, you could be working on that statement or thinking about that, or in your classrooms, just taking note of yourself, or even talking to your colleagues. If you're getting evaluated, ask somebody, how do you think I do with equity? What are some things I do well? Where could I develop in that area? Or professional development that you're involved in. There are lots of opportunities. It could be volunteer work that you're doing.
I think one danger in answering this question is sometimes, for example, people who look like me think that, hey, I represent equity. I represent the disproportionately impacted students, which is short for DI, the full word for DI. So I just have to say, hey, I am Asian. So that's all I need to say. Please remember, that's not the only thing about the disproportionately impacted students, and that's not the only thing about diversity. There's a wide range of diversity. So I think what I've seen so far is that's what a lot of people think. When people in ESL, I used to be told all the time, hey, we teach ESL students, how more diverse would this be? And so again, even if you think people should know, please don't assume that's all you need to say. You know what I do. So I know what diversity is. Please don't do that.
I think one other one like that I'll say is my pet peeve. Somebody will say, well, I'm married to a Japanese American. I'm thinking, and I'm thinking, okay, that's wonderful. What does this have to do with the question? And it may be that it's very relevant to the question, but the person should demonstrate. It's not just by the very fact that who you're married to, or who your partner is, makes you sensitive to diversity. So, but I read, how many of you have read things like that in applications?
I've read one that said, I like Mexican food. Honestly.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
So don't do that, right?
Don't do that.
Yeah. Or if that is what you're going to write, then that's where you need to work on. Because you're not going to toss over the bar in terms of working with community college students in a really diverse community. We're trying to move the needle on outcomes. That's what we're focused on. So, because I want to say you've got to be yourself, but at the same time, that'd be an area of growth for somebody.
And I think the best thing to do, because you have time now, is to research. Just go online, research, find out what that word exactly means into different people, and find the interpretation that you find, syncs with what you, think, equity or diversity is. The next one is what Lisa said already, be yourself, because no one is better than being you than you. And the moment you try to be somebody else, because oh, I really admire Tony, I'm going to try to teach and demonstrate my teaching style like Tony. I would totally fail, okay? Because I'll be spending 80% of my mental capacity just pretending to be Tony, and the other 20% is not enough to actually teach the class. Question?
I was just wondering if we could go back to the equity question for a
Yeah.
second. So we heard a lot of the general kind of surface statements that don't really work. Would you be able to share something that really stood out or that was really good in an equity statement, or something like an example that somebody shared or something?
With everything, equity has a continuum. I mean, where people are just sort of superficially there.
Yeah.
Then there's this other end where people are just deeply rooted. It's their identity, it's what they do, it's what they believe deeply in. I'm looking for that continuum where the person is.
Okay.
If you're given things that are so deeply, uniquely ingrained in who you are, then I also look for some evidence of that being played out in terms of your activities. Do you have life experiences that are consistent with this end of the spectrum? Or are you only telling me examples that are on this end of the spectrum as well? Sincerity is going to be the most important thing for me with the equity statement. And the fact that people have really wrestled with these really challenging issues. And even if you talk about the struggle you've had in terms of wrestling with those issues, at least that shows some authentic engagement of the topic and the tension and the stress that comes from it, and also your commitment to get past it, to be a better person, be a better instructor. Those are the key things that really pop out to me. And in our application process, that's the only question you have where you can begin to sort of give your own narrative. The rest is just, where I went to school, attaching transcripts and things like that. So it makes it a really important question. Those are the elements.
And to add on to that, even though in the application packet, there's this one spot, the very first question is about equity and diversity. It's possible to sprinkle it in your cover letter to add, individual activities in your resume, in your CV about what you've done regarding disproportionate impact or equity-related work, training, workshops, and how you've contributed to the classroom.
And it's such an important thing that we try. Oftentimes, if you read the questions very carefully, you'll find an equity thread in the question, which means we're asking this of you multiple times. If you're sensitive enough to perceive it. Because whenever we create a context for the question, there's going to be an equity thread. So don't just answer the question, answer the question in the context in which it was asked, like at American River College. Well, that's an opportunity to, if you understand our population and our students and the challenges we face, to speak against equity within your answer to the question.
And of course, we would like to see authenticity. It's not just picking up words and putting it in a resume or in the application. There must be some level of evidence.
I think in order to understand what is equity, one way to look at it is what is the lack of equity. So you think of situations where there is a lack of equity and what is that situation is going to look like. And then you think of a situation where equity is, where people are sensitive to equity, and what is that scenario going to look like. And being able to differentiate between the two is going to be the key of your understanding of equity. And having that understanding means not only can you answer that question in a written form, but during the interview, you can also kind of interweave that understanding into not just that one specific question that asks you about equity or diversity, but also to answer the other questions. Like there might be a question that's only says, okay, how would you help a student in a particular situation? Okay, and it is not clearly labeled as a diversity question. It is not clearly labeled as an equity question. But if you understand that, okay, if you understand what equity is and the importance of equity, then you can, interweave, the element of equity into your answer to that question. I'm not sure whether I make the point or not.
I think the other part is, there's a difference between diversity, multiculturalism, equality, equity. You need to know your nomenclature of what's what, and to be able to speak to that, I think, in that written answer, because I see some candidates will talk about diversity, but then they're not really practicing equity in the classroom. So, there's a lot of information out there also available through the RCTL and other areas to gain in your skills in that area. If it's something that you don't have a strong command of, you can learn that language, because you may be practicing it, right? Sometimes as teachers, you're practicing something, but you don't necessarily know the theory behind it or what the name is. It's important to be able to name it so that you can convey that to somebody else.
Sometimes when we read the application and see the responses to that sort of question, what we see is a dump of vocabulary words. So they know the words, if not specifically the fundamental meaning and what you do with it, and those don't have a big impression on us when we're reading applications.
It's the what you can do or have done.
But on the other side of this is that you also need to use the vocabulary that is current, because there's some vocabulary that used to, be acceptable that now is not acceptable or is frowned at. And so there, you use the terminology that is trendy. I don't want to say trendy. It's acceptable now in this current climate, but at the same time, you also need to demonstrate that you really know what the vocabulary means.
A good place, if this is an area you want to grow in, is look at the American River College strategic plan, and in that is a statement on equity and inclusivity. And that is a very carefully crafted statement, and if you don't know what the terminology is in that statement, look it up, because you'll learn a lot about it. The words are very intentional in that document. Yes?
Can you repeat that resource again?
Sure. It's the American River College strategic plan, and there's a statement on equity and inclusivity that's part of that.
And if there's anything, if there's a terminology used here that you are not sure about, feel free to email me. If I don't have it, I will give you the source. I will research the source.
And the CTL is another place that they're doing, Jen LaFlamme, who's doing a lot of work on equity issues. She's another faculty resource that if you'd like to learn more, and there are a lot of professional development opportunities happening right now in this area, that attending a session or asking for advice about what kind of session you might go to could also be beneficial.
Yeah, there's a reading group that's reading, about topics in equity. So Jennifer sends an email regularly.
Okay, so getting back to my notes, I actually wrote notes. So I'm going through the notes items one by one. I'm being a good student. Because I am a student this semester, I'm actually taking a class from one of our faculty on this campus. So the next point is about, how much prep should you do? Some people want to do a lot of preps to the point that they can memorize the entire opening statement. The first question, because the first question is always something like, tell us about yourself and why do you think you are a strong candidate for this position? You know, there's slight variations of that question, but they're basically all asking about the same thing. I'm not going to say whom, okay, but someone who I know and very dear to me basically wanted to practice this until that person is able to memorize the entire answer. When I interviewed for this job, for the job that I have now, I never really kind of have too much about it. I just, you know, I know who I am. I know what the job is about. I know my strengths, you know what part of my strengths will apply to this job, and that's about it. And I got a good night's sleep. I got my coffee, and I'm ready to go. But some people want to do more research, and I don't really know the answer, like how much prep is appropriate. I guess it's individual. What do you guys think?
If you're on a committee and you encounter a candidate who is well prepared because he or she anticipated the introductory question, the diversity question, the classroom management question, and oh, we asked the classroom management question, and they have a canned response that they rattle off, it comes across as fake and over-rehearsed. On the other hand, if the well-prepared candidate anticipates questions and thinks about, well, I want to hit these points, and they have certain key items they really want to hit, but they don't memorize word for word a presentation that they then rattle off and we're going, where'd that come from? Because it doesn't seem real. It seems artificial. So what Tuck is saying about being himself and being authentic, it's very hard to be authentic if you're reading a script that's going through your head. So yeah, anticipate questions, rehearse your answers, be prepared, but don't etch them on stone and then give us that, because that's probably not going to come across very well.
One thing I should have mentioned is when you get the questions from the interview, you're given 10 minutes to review them, and you also have to do a writing sample. So for the 10 minutes you're reviewing the questions, you can jot notes down. And my strategy for that is to read through the questions. If there's one that I go, I need to think about that, that's the one I spend all my time on. And then I jot some bullet points down. But whatever notes you take during that process, you can bring those to the interview. And you can be jotting down, oh, okay, I'm going to talk about when I did the diversity and equity plan or whatever, jot some things. And that way, while you're interviewing, because it is nerve-wracking, there'll be probably 10 or 12 people on the committee, our nerves get the better of us, you've got to breathe and do all of that. For me personally, because I'm a very introverted person, having it written in front of me is helpful. I'm not going to be reading like this, but if I panic for a minute, I can breathe and kind of look down and get my bearings about me. And often I will do that, but I end up not looking at it. But it gives me the security of knowing if I do panic, I have it there. So I think it depends on your style. For me, I need that anchor, but again, not too stiff, not too pre-rehearsed. And you don't want to be reading off the paper, but if you need that as a guideline for yourself, that's there might be 4 or 5 things that you want to hit in the interview, and you jot those down and bring it with you to make sure that you mention those items, so that you don't leave the room going, oh no, I didn't talk about all my curriculum work, right? Something that might be very important.
And certainly make eye contacts, so that, with the committee members. And even though we cannot respond, and sort of like sometimes, given a question other than the teaching demo question, if there is a sort of like a question we cannot respond, like, is this right? We cannot say it's right or wrong. However, we also want to be warm. We want to make you as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. We've all been there. We understand how difficult and nerve-wracking it is, as we're stating. So we understand that. So the committee understands that part. So if it looks like we are not responding, it's because of, sort of, again, trying to be as equitable as possible to all the candidates, but at the same time, we understand, and having eye contact with the panel is always helpful. And coming across as human is always good.
There are always going to be some questions that to answer, that are part of your passion, then there's going to be some questions that are really hard. If you were to rehearse everything, they're all about the same, and I never see what really excites you about teaching or about being here. So I really look for that question that you just nailed, because that's largely who you are. That's the question you relate most to. It's also the trait that you put the most time, or just it's just innately who you are. It may be emphasized in your life, but if I don't see that, it's just kind of always monotone, and then I have to make it up, I have to guess. So you don't want the committee to try to guess. You want to present yourself as authentically and as sincerely as you can. At least that way we choose based on who you are as opposed to who you think you are.
It's important to read the room when you're presenting, just like you would in a classroom, right? If you're presenting and your students are like, hopefully you're adjusting what you're doing, right? So I think it's important to be, the committee will be, they're not going to be super animated because we can't smile really big at you or anything, but
That's an issue.
it can't be an empty issue. So we have to be equitable in terms of how we're responding to candidates, but you can still get the vibe of the room. So, be looking for that energy. And I would say, again, if your interview's at 1 o'clock, the panel's already been interviewing for about 5 hours, they're tired, and think about that when you present. I did that once for an interview where I used something that was kinesthetic instead of providing a visual presentation because I knew that I was going after lunch and I thought they're going to be wiped out. So that's the teacher in me, right? Even though I was going for an administrator position, I was using my teaching chops to say I need to keep them awake, and I wanted to do something that would make them remember me because I knew they were going to see a bunch of PowerPoints, and I said I want to be the person who did something different. I still used a PowerPoint to show I could do that, but I used a manipulative intentionally to make a point.
Okay, I got one more thing to say, and then we'll move on. Okay. Yeah. I think sometimes people, when they think about, okay, how am I going to differentiate? How do I differentiate myself from the other candidates? Because that's kind of really what part of the interview is about, is the differentiation. And there are many personality tests, that you can take online, and some are free and some are not free. And I recommend, taking some of these, assessments, especially the free ones. Okay, some of those are actually pretty good. It's not set in stone. Take it with a grain of salt. But the result of that tells you something about yourself that you may not be aware. Okay, maybe you read the result of the personality test, like, wow, that's exactly me. But it might bring up some points that you may never realize about yourself, ever. So, taking those tests, ahead of time, understanding yourself a little bit better can help you make a statement, especially the opening statement, that helps to differentiate who you are from the other candidates. Now, does that naturally or automatically means that it will make you the best candidate? Maybe, maybe not. But at least you'll know more about yourself, and then the interviewers will also know more about you. So if anyone is interested, I can talk about this a little bit more after the panel is done.
One other quick item, just because I don't want to forget this one. When you get a call from the office from the staff member inviting you for an interview, that's when your interview begins. So bear in mind that that staff member is my assistant or the president's assistant, and if you're coming across as being super demanding, we've heard all kinds of things. Why can't it be at 1:30? Why does it have to be at 1 o'clock? We're like, so what that gets reported back to us is, oh, this candidate was saying all of these things. So you're already interviewing at that point. So it's really important that you act respectfully toward the staff, that when you show up, you're being respectful. They're part of our community, and so I just wanted to mention that, because sometimes I think people think, it tells us something about that person's relationship with staff, and that's not something that we're interested in maintaining. That kind, we work respectfully with our staff. That's our goal. So I've definitely seen that happen several times.
I had a candidate make my AA cry. He was yelling at my administrative assistant, who was the nicest human being on the planet, and that was a deal breaker. There was no way I could recommend that person, because if you're doing that in an interview process, That's just not gonna be okay. So we talk to our staff, we value their opinions. They are as much a part of the interview process as the people that are on the committee, because they're going to provide feedback in the process.
So you didn't bring that candidate in just to grill the candidate?
Actually, the candidate, they were so upset because they had to come back for something else, and they chose not to come back. So they self-selected themselves out of the process, but it was not good.
And I would say the expectation is that that kind of relationship will continue. In other words, it's not just for the interview that we want to have that kind of relationship. Everyone putting your relationship with everyone in the college.
And I would say conversely, I will have at times staff say to me, I'm really rooting for candidate X, they're so wonderful, you know? And that also says something to me. It doesn't mean that will be the deciding vote, but it tells me that they've already made a really good impression on the staff.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that. Or sometimes they'll say, so-and-so got the position, they'll be like, yes, I really like that person, you know? Which is a better reaction than, oh, not that guy. That's not, I haven't heard that, thankfully, but you don't want to be that person. But it's an opportunity to start building that relationship if you don't have that established already, those individuals.
I'd like to home in on something fundamental, which is getting that interview in the first place. And to that end, I'd like to mention that serving on an interview panel, a screening committee, and all of that sort of stuff is just a royal pain. It's important. I mean, how nice is it to help pick the people you're going to work with? So a lot of us volunteer for hiring committees, but in the math department, when we have an opening, we get 100 or 120 applicants, and we have to go through all of them. So here's my advice to you. Think about the people who are screening the applications and be as nice to them as possible. Make your application as reader-friendly as you can. You've been told that you need to make it complete. Don't leave any blanks. You've been told you should proofread it. Yes, don't put in grammatical or spelling errors because that really downgrades it. But there are a couple of things you can do to make it nicer. And first of all, we live in an electronic age where you don't have to type in your application. It's online, and you can edit it multiple times until you get it the way you want. And the fields can be larger or smaller depending on how much information you put in there. So number one, take your application, fill it out, all of the things that you need to put in there, and then make sure that you're filling it out in light of what's in the job announcement, so you've addressed everything. So fill out the application, go back and read the job announcement again, and make sure you hit all of the important features. And when you do your cover letter to go with it, in the old days, a cover letter that said, Dear Los Rios, please consider my application for position number 5543221. No, that is a sales brochure now. Your cover letter should be probably one page, but it should hit the highlights of telling us why you're the person, why you're the right person for the position. So that when we're looking at our screening criteria, each criterion is based on something from the job announcement. So we're checking boxes as we're going through your application and giving you points. Oh, you know, this is a 10-point criterion and you got 8 of them. Or you got 5. Or I didn't find this one. That's the worst. If you missed something, you almost automatically disqualify yourself because you're getting a big fat 0 from people for that. So be screener friendly in your cover letter, in your application, and make sure that you make it as easy for us as possible to rate you and rate you positively. That will help you a lot. You had something.
So structurally, one of the ways to do this, and this is what I did for when I applied actually for the job that I have now, open up the job announcement, cut and paste it into Word, go to another job announcement of the same category, so another faculty job announcement, cut and paste that into another Word document. Then you can go through and see what are the boilerplate statements in here, what are the generic things that we're looking for that we still need to hit, right? But then you'll also see the specific things of what's different. And those different things, those are the specific things that the department is asked to put into that job description. Flip those around into bullet point items which you are specifically answering as you're writing your letter of interest, as you are going through and answering the application. So you've then got that template of, this is what the department and this committee has asked for. These are the things that the campus generally says that are generic through these, which are still important. You bullet pointed them, and you should be able to answer each of those things as you go through your application. And then take the entire application before you hit submit, cut and paste it into Word again, because then it'll spell check it all. Spell check and grammar check, and go through and read through the whole thing that way. So I spent a lot of time cutting and pasting it out and then dropping things back in to keep myself on task with that.
And I'll underscore the advice you received about completeness, because there are many times things that people overlook. One of the assumptions people sometimes make, if you're a part-timer here, and we already supposedly know that, remember, don't assume that. Make sure it's in your application. One of our otherwise excellent candidates several years ago forgot to mention he's bilingual. That's a qualification. We would have liked to have known that. When I applied, I am, by the way, a person who went through 5 interview processes to get the job I have, and I'm not counting the times I applied and didn't get an interview. And that's by no means a record, but I've been through this a number of times. And each time I refined the application and included more and polished it to where finally it worked. And that's one of the refrains you've heard from Lisa. If you don't make it and it feels like a failure, you might have been a very attractive candidate. You need to give us another chance. You need to come back, even though coming back is painful. I know it is, but if you don't come back, we don't hire you because you need to give us that opportunity. And one of the things that I didn't put in my first application was that English is my second language. So I'm sensitive to people who are English learners because once I was. And that is useful information because that underscores the fact that I reach out to English learners and try to communicate with them because I know what they're going through. Now, I went through this in kindergarten, so I didn't have to do this as an adult, so my English is pretty good. But I didn't mention that at first. The other thing I want to share with you, not about the application anymore, I've told you what I want you to know about that. Make it easy on those of us who screen your application. The other thing is the demo. You'll get 10 minutes. Sometimes in the math department we get 12 minutes for the teaching demo. Now, just think how ridiculous that is. We're going to judge your teaching ability on 10 or 12 minutes of a presentation. You know, we know, that you cannot possibly do yourself full justice in so brief a period. At some universities, they invite a potential faculty member and have him or her give seminars that last all day. And the whole department attends and evaluates. Whereas we have a select committee of 8 to 10 people, and we're looking at you do this 10 or 12-minute demo. The number one thing I think you've all grasped from what we've said so far is don't try to do everything in a 10-minute span, because you can't. If you do that, you end up rushing through things, and it's a comical display, like someone is, for you older people who know about vinyl, it's like you took a 33 1/3 and played it at 78, and it does not come across well. So here's my advice to you on the demo. Set the scene as you're putting up your technology or you're getting up to the whiteboard. Have a handout. Make sure your name is on the handout in nice, clear letters. It doesn't have to be a headline. but it should be nice and clear. Because later, when we're evaluating the candidates and we've got stacks of paper, we want you to get credit for the one that's yours. So put your name on the handout. It'll be like something that you would authentically give to a class that maybe has a first part that says, okay, previous lesson, we covered these topics. Okay, today's lesson, we're doing this topic, and the centerpiece of today's topic is whatever we told you to demo. Make sure we know that the preliminaries are all taken care of. We have had presentations where the candidate spends the first half setting up the preliminaries. If that's not in the prompt, if we don't tell them, derive this from fundamentals, then assume it and just jump into the details of the actual thing we asked you to do. And if you're doing the osculating circle to a parabola, and you're going to have this beautiful nesting circle here, you should have a graphic to go with it to illustrate the conclusion. You shouldn't spend the first half of your demo deriving the curvature formula, because that's inherent in what you're supposed to be doing. And even though we tell you we're going to pretend to be your students, we are not very sharp students. So don't go asking us questions, what formula should I use? No, you can ask us, if you have a couple of formulas on the board, how many like this one? How many like this one? Okay, we don't mind, doing that so much. And you can say, okay, we've got more votes for B, I'm going to use B. That also gives us the impression that you're ready to go either way, that you can do a demo. I once helped a colleague who was a part-timer get a job at CRC because he was doing the fundamental theorem of calculus, and there are two very popular proofs of it. And he said, which one should I do? I said, prepare both of them. He said, oh, then I asked the committee which one I should do. I said, yeah, you can do that, and they won't tell you, because they won't cooperate to that degree. But go ahead and say, okay, I've got two presentations. Well, would someone call heads or tails, and he flipped a 50-cent piece, and it was JFK, so it was heads, so he did the mean value theorem approach. And everyone in the room remembered his presentation. He didn't get the job. But they called him a couple of weeks later and offered him an LTT because they remembered him. And so even though he hadn't had as much experience as the successful candidate, they wanted him on board. So be prepared to be flexible in your presentation, set the stage so everyone knows what went before, and near the end of it, it doesn't hurt if you're a handout or if you have a second handout that says, this is what comes next. And therefore, even though it's only 10 minutes or maybe 12 minutes, and it's such a brief sample of what you can do, it's going to be a reasonably fair sample of what you can do. And you also provided some documentation that they can hold on to.
The other thing to remember is that not everyone that is in that committee is a content expert. So when I taught math, or I taught theater for 17 years, and I was on a number of math committees, and I was the idiot slow student in the classroom. And there were a couple of times in which the committee really loved one candidate, and I had to speak up and say, I couldn't understand a word of what they were saying. They weren't teaching to the level that we asked them to teach to. They were teaching to a graduate seminar, because they were teaching to a college in the room, but they weren't teaching to the end, because I was like, I'm the student. I'm the one that doesn't understand what's going on. So remember that you can't inherently expect that everyone is going to be at your same level, that you are teaching a class of community college students, not a class of faculty.
Be as friendly as you can be to your pretend class. And I'll conclude with one item, which is your cover letter, which I said should be a sales brochure. Read that over carefully, make sure it hits all the key items. And also, I like the warning about if you're applying to lots of different schools, because we apply to everything we can go to, keep the right name on there. My favorite cover letter was the one that said, I have a research PhD in topological geometry and a robust research program. I am willing to come to your institution until I find a more suitable position. Honest to God. And this fellow thought, Oh, we would be so grateful that this glorious PhD was willing to help poor little old us. And of course, we didn't even invite that person for an interview. And when he received the kiss-off letter, I just can imagine that why did they not seize this opportunity? You, because you have experience here, you know us. You know us about as well as you can because you're inside. Pitch your letter to us as colleagues and future full-time colleagues so that we understand you are people who fit in.
Actually, I have to say this. You didn't write back and say we're not working.
I don't think that would have been proper.
We're
I
gonna
think
go
it's
to
100%
Stephen,
proper.
we're gonna go to Stephen, and then we'll go to Rena and have them share, their notes with you. They came prepared with their notes. What I do want to say is that what Tony said, it's really, it's unbelievable, but it happened in a situation it was in. And so please don't show anything that would put down ARC. Because there was an interview where I think after the presentation, everyone looked like, seriously, we were put down to the ground, buried, and all that, and this person wanted to work here. So yeah, that's really important. You don't think that people would do it, but they do. I don't know why, but they do. Okay, so Stephen, please.
Yeah, so sort of, we could do this for all the rest of the day, and still we would just probably scratch the surface. So, so that's what makes this a little hard. And that's sort of the way the interview is as well. You can talk, some people can talk about themselves all day, and sometimes it's harder for others. So if it's hard for you, you're going to be at a disadvantage, and also there's cultural issues involved there as well in terms of presenting yourself. So, even I still struggle with the pronoun, should I say I did this, or should I say we did this? Because if you're constantly saying we, then people might think, well, what did you do? And then if you're constantly saying I, how's that going to play out in terms of people feeling that you have this robust opinion of yourself? So, so all of that, it's just going to have to balance out in the mix because you can't control everything. But a few things that I kind of want to say is, and really important things that I've kind of distilled is, read the questions carefully in the interview. They are highly processed questions. We have to write them. They're written by a committee. There are members of the committee that critique them. They're changed, they're adapted, they're wordsmithed. Then they go to the vice president of instruction who looks over them to make sure that they are appropriate in terms of their content. And then it goes to the district office before it actually gets back to us as a document within your questions. So every word in that question is important. So read it really carefully. The next thing is when you start to answer those questions, it's very easy to get off track or to go somewhere on a tangent here and there. Stop and refer back to the question so that you can, and when we see that, it looks really good. It looks as if you're self-correcting. Because we know you're getting off track too. But we can't say anything. And that really helps out a lot. And what that does is it just keeps adding up the score in terms of the points that you made that we expected to be made in that question. There's a lot of people who answer questions and they leave so much meat on the bone because they haven't hit all those points or they hadn't thought that question through to the true significance of what we're trying to ask. I mean, there's a superficial, there's an intermediate, and then there's a really, really, really deep, profound answer. When you get to all of those levels, it's very powerful as a presentation. Okay. The other thing is, as an adjunct, it's a good and it's a bad kind of side. The good thing is that you know a lot about the personality of the college and what we're going through and what we're seeking to be. The bad thing is that you are going to take a lot of things for granted. And you won't mention things simply because you would say, oh, that's a given. It's sort of like a fish in the ocean. The last thing he's going to talk about is water. Because it's a given. It's never not there. So in the interview, when you're working against people who are coming from the outside, they don't have that blind spot. And so they're going to perhaps say more things and score higher points. It's all about how many bells we can ring with each one of those questions in terms of how deeply we touch the content of the question. So don't take anything for granted. Realize that no matter how comfortable you feel with some of the people on the committee, it's not going to help. Okay? Do your homework. Do your homework and find a way to tell the committee that you've done your homework. I mean, doing your homework and then not getting in a couple of statistics or really key details doesn't let anyone know that it means that much to you. Also, nerves and managing them is a challenge for a lot of people because it's high stakes and it means a lot to you. Personally, I don't mind seeing someone show nerves. All that tells me is that it means a lot to them. But if you're shaking and sweating to the point where we're wondering if we need to call 911, well, that's going to be problematic. So the way to try to negate that nerve issue is walk through this in your head. Not so much as a verbatim rehearsal, but go to a quiet spot and just see yourself doing this over and over and over again so that you can kind of visualize yourself in that room. You know the rules. We're not going to say anything. And just understand that you're going to be doing all the talking. The other thing is, if the interview is scheduled for 50 minutes, we expect you to go 50 minutes. Okay, don't leave any time on the clock where you could actually score some additional points. I've seen interviews are flawless, except they ended 30 minutes too soon, and that's not so good. I mean, because we've already anticipated a complete answer, and it's going to be hard for you to get all of the points that are available within that. And there really aren't any points, but I'm just saying, get all the credit for what you know and what you bring to the table in the question if you're constantly ending too soon. The other thing is, stop and think about who you are and what you have to offer to the institution. And make sure that that comes out, whatever it is. Because it is the thing that you lead with. And doing that soul searching and understanding who you are and what your most profound value to the institution is very helpful. Because when you have a clear sense of that, it allows us to get a clearer sense of that. But if you don't have a clear sense of that, how do you think we're going to figure it out? So you don't necessarily think about preparing for an interview this way, but it's critical. Think about the institution itself. I mean, institutions have a personality, and you can glean this personality from the way the job description is written. If you just look really carefully at the words that have been selected, use those words. Use that approach. Use that philosophical couching that the institution has given you. And there's lots of things that we do in terms of our publications that sort of tells you who we are. And if you're aware of that, you can kind of change your vocabulary in ways that use words that are palatable to your audience and to the culture. And then it looks as if you're one of us. Even if you're not.
But could be.
But it looks real good. We can't tell that that's not a word you ever used before. But they are words that that you will see used often in our strategic plan. And those words are used often because the meaning is significant and it comes up over and over again. But for people who are trying to assimilate to a culture that's somewhat foreign to it, that is a good key. Language is a key component of how we assimilate culture. And so those are the things I kind of want to leave you with. And still know that there's a million other things to talk about, but the most important, one more thing. We will ask you at the end of the interview usually, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because you're an adjunct and you know the process and maybe you've been interviewed before, you're likely to say what? No, I think I got it. I know what to expect. Okay, you just left a whole bunch of points there. You can go back and clean up an answer that you don't think you did so well on. Or you can ask another question that might be an issue moving forward that you want to get some insights on from the committee. But when you don't answer the question, sometimes it looks as if, well, they don't have a whole lot of interest, or they're ready to go on, or they're ready to get out of here. We're talkers, as you've figured out by now. We will talk a lot. So a really great, well-placed question gets us to reveal some of our personality and what we hold most dear. And that's helpful to you as you move forward in the interview process. So that's really it. Thank you.
Rena, please.
So I will just complete what she ended with the last question. Just for clarification, generally for most committees, we do not score that because it is optional, because we don't want to ding a person for not saying anything. However, what we always say is that if you said something that would be applicable to the previous 10 questions, then we would go and add points to those. So there is the value-added part that Steve is talking about.
They can also use it for a closing statement.
Closing.
Leaves us with a good feeling about it.
So.
Or if you've done a blunder and you want to correct it because you know you did it.
I remember now.
That's the opportunity.
This or something. That's an opportunity, yeah, exactly. So just want to clarify that we generally don't score that question, but at the same time it provides opportunity for good closure. Okay, so let me just go, since being the last one, most of the points are already covered very well. So one of the things that I would like to say is that in terms of the application packet, as Tony was mentioning, because of course there are so many, to the point is good. Sometimes we do see an applicant might add their student reviews and score sheets and all, and we can't score on any, it's already pre-formatted. Our screening criteria had to be done prior to we can see the applicant pool or anything, so that it's done prior to knowing who all have applied and so forth. So in any case, that's never part of the criteria. We can only ask questions that, have screening criteria that relates to the job announcement. So having all that is really pages and pages that we are scrolling. It's just like taking our mouse and literally dragging down. And if you're spending a lot of effort in putting those things together, and that messes up the packet, basically it's a non-starter as far as the screening goes. So I think it would be worthwhile to spend more time in just answering to the questions asked in the job announcement and the packet overall. It's also, if you are asked for 2 letters of reference or support, then please provide 2. I would say that the deans here, if this is the only place that you teach and you want a letter of support, then we will definitely, even though we are in the committee, we will absolutely support you. Yes?
Well, I was going to say, when you're asking for letters of rec, make sure you're reading the room as to whether another person wants to write you a letter of rec. Because I've received letters of rec in part of a package like, this person doesn't like this person. Why was this person asked to do a letter of rec, or they don't know this person? So do be mindful of that, because because you want to make sure that the person is, and I would say that those, if you're asking one of us for it, we're happy to do that.
Write
And,
that.
and it's not a violation of our process for us to write
Correct.
you a letter of regret for that job. But if it's from another college and you get a weird vibe from the person, you may not want to submit that letter of regret, because it can be daunting.
And I'll say because I have multiple, faculty members here who are from my area, so even if there are multiple applicants for the same pool, I've written for multiple people, but that doesn't mean that you have to ask, or if it's a thing if you did not, it doesn't matter. But if it asks for 2, then you can only take into consideration 2, and if you want it to be an overachiever and you put 3, then we will make the decision as to how we do it. It may not be the best 2, we might just take the first 2 and be done with it, and that's kind of,
Courtesy helps too.
At this point, the Lostrel's website does not allow you to upload more than 2. Okay, there you go. After 2, it will not allow. But you know what, I have had people who have put like together, so maybe this is a good time. Uploads, but there are 3 letters. Sorry, this is a good time for me to introduce Carly Braden, who is one of the Associate Vice President of Instruction, Carly. So that's why Carly's been giving you, insightful information. I didn't know when to break in, but yeah, we are team presenting, that's great. So as far as the packet is concerned, concise and to the point is great. And then for the interview, this is way back when I first was applying for this position. My immediate supervisor, Pam Walker, she was at the AVP at the time. She told me that on the average, 3 to 4 minutes per question, it is, sort of a good average time for response. If it's too little, it's too short. That Steve was mentioning, it's too short. And again, if we go too long, then typically the interest begins to fall and people begin to do their cell phone or whatever. And also, if you think about it, there are roughly about 10 questions, and 3 to 4 minutes between 30 and 40 minutes, and then there's the teaching demo, that's a 10, right? So that's essentially the interview. So keep in mind, you are preparing for 3 to 4 minutes. Maybe some answers will be a little bit more, some answers will be a little less, but yes, I have done that, is not saying as much, or going on and on with too many examples is also kind of undesirable. But one of the things, wherever you can, if you can bring in your personal experience, like, oh, I was teaching then in Washington State, or I was teaching in Florida, and this is what we had, and this was the scenario. And, even though it's not exactly here, it's not exactly this moment, and even it may not even been in college, it could have been in high school or at a university, but it's relevant because it relates to students, or with a colleague, ideas that you've done. Even though we may not have, if you have worked with curriculum, if you have done additional items that's related to teaching, wherever you can, if you can provide experience, your personal experience, that's powerful. That is very powerful. And I cannot tell of all committees, but for the science committees, we are always very responsive in the teaching demo. So yes, we are not necessarily the smart students, but we will, if you ask a question, we will respond. And so we will participate because we ask you to ask you to do a slice of your classroom presentation. So in other words, so we are your students at the moment. I remember way back when there was I was a faculty then, and there was a titration teaching demo, and the person went around the room checking
our shoes to see if we're wearing cover-toe shoes. Because that's what they would do. Of course, we were not necessarily wearing that, but because it was a slice of a classroom and safety, wear your goggles and things like that. So also in the sense that we're saying that there's a 10-minute slice and we don't expect you to do everything, so we have to do like the fast speed, like the 33 1/3 speed, to the 78 and so forth, RPM. But it helps to have a planning, and then, we always, I know that I always, whenever I've done a demo, teaching or presentation demo, it always tends to have a little bit more because I'm always worried that I will not have enough. So we all do that. But it is good to be able to, as you see that, you get the 1 minute or 2 minute warning, to try and bring it to a closure as if you knew how to manage your time. And that's always a good thing in terms of, even if it is the last 3 slides we couldn't show, like somebody said, bring a copy of your presentation and they have that. So unless it is so dynamic and you want to show that last show-off slide, then you make sure that you get to the last slide, maybe skip the the previous 2 and show off absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I would also say, think about what you're trying to sell in your teaching demo.
Yeah.
It's about the content certainly. But is it about being a sage on the stage? Is that how you teach? Do you just stand up there and do you just lecture? Are you going to lecture at us for 10 minutes? Are you going to get us up and moving? I've actually been sitting in committees where someone's gotten us up moving. We didn't even have a PowerPoint. I'm like, it's a bold choice. And at the end, I'm like, this was awesome. Because I've been sitting in this room for 2 days now. And you got me up and got me engaged in the material. But if that's not the way that you teach, this isn't the time to experiment. Do something that's honest to you, to the way that you teach. This is your opportunity to show us your best work. You've got some time to practice it, but it doesn't just have to be a PowerPoint. It doesn't just have to be a discussion. It can be a variety of different modalities, but really think about that. What are you trying to show us in this 10 minutes that you have? And I've seen really successful lectures. I've seen really successful things where people have handed out things and said, read this and discuss it with your partner. It doesn't just have to be that same
however, I also have to say one thing that for equity, again, from our side, that I have always maintained that we cannot have our adjunct faculty member take items from the stock room because, that is not accessible to others. So please understand that that's where it comes from. I know that, some colleagues, my faculty colleagues, are not always so pleased for doing so, but this is the reasoning for it. But I know that all of you are
bring the materials
creative.
from their stock room to do their demos, is what she said.
Yes.
Particularly like in chemistry or biology, using our equipment, because an adjunct, or someone coming from outside the system wouldn't have that.
Oh, we have toys.
Because it's,
Expensive.
free testing science.
Yeah, but no, so I'm just saying, I wanted to clarify that it is okay for you as you have that first phone call, exciting phone calling invitation, to check with the person, and sometimes they can get in touch with us and clarify that what you can expect and what kind of support you will have. It's very important. We do not want to trick anybody. We don't want you to just fiddle with the technology on top of everything that you have with your level of stress. We want to support you in every possible way we can. It's okay to clarify that what you have. Make sure that you're prepared for that.
Yeah, I think because we have 5 minutes only, I am just going to say this. If you have follow-up questions, send them to me because, again, I can probably find possible ways to respond to you because, again, you probably don't know that people served as equity representative. I actually have served on, 20 or more committees, in science, in math, in library, in all kinds of places. But I would say, you know, if you can build a relationship, a connection, be involved in your department, your full-time colleague, you know, might be someone who can write a letter of recommendation for you. But again, be careful about who you go to. You never know. I would say, be frank, ask, do you think you can write a good letter of recommendation for me? Actually, I taught my students to do that, and one of them actually used that on me. Do you think you can write a good letter of recommendation for me? And so I think it's fair to ask. And if someone says, you know, maybe you want to ask another person, then you know, that's the clue. Don't insist. Yeah, don't insist, because I have people say, but please, please, please. So finally I wrote 2 or 3 sentences, a short paragraph, because I couldn't get the person to accept the fact that I just don't think I should write a letter for the person. So again, I think that you have opportunities on campus as well to be involved. And I know you're very busy, you are, you know,
One thing that I want to add, I believe it used to be at least that Los Rios used to have people practice, rehearse, an interview, help with interview for HR. They don't do it anymore.
Another place you might want to think about is we have the faculty diversity program. And I think people who have gone through the faculty diversity program usually get some kind of recognition when they apply, mention we have completed the Los Rios faculty diversity internship program. That I know some people here are not faculty, but even if you are, that's a good place to kind of get the inside information about what this college values, what the Los Rios district values. I think Julie had a question.
Oh, it was just as far as recommendations, if you work between 2 campuses, is it better to have recommendations from one or the other? And what if the people are on the panel, does it matter? Like your deans, you might be on the panel.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, you know, and I would say that getting a letter from a dean, depending on how well the dean knows you, because a dean may not have seen you teach for the whole period of time, because a lot of deans just stop by for 10 minutes or an hour and then they leave because they have other things to do. And so it is okay for you to invite your full-time colleagues to visit your classes, even when you don't have your performance reviews. Yes. When I am invited, I feel very happy to go, because again, it's a way of connecting with your full-time faculty colleagues and say, hey, I value your input, I want to improve. Don't feel like you can only have them when you have your performance review.
Courtney has already invited you to follow up with questions directly to her. Most of us are also approachable, so if you have follow-up questions addressing anything in particular that we said that we could clarify, I believe we would be willing to do that.
Yeah. And what you what you can do is, in case you cannot remember Tony Barcelo's last name, okay. But you see my email all the time. Email me and say, I have a question for Tony. Can you forward it to Tony, or can you give me Tony's email address? Well, full last name, Barcelos, and I'll give it to you. Or if you don't know his last name because you can't say it, and but of course you can say my last name. Oh. We'll try. Anyway, so are there the last-minute questions?
All right, so I have a question. I just went over the screening criteria, and I have a question about diversity. So as a candidate, how much would it benefit you when you stand out if you attend diversity workshop or serve in a diversity program often? Or would that help? Would that help you stand out more, or do you just have to earn diversity experience in your teaching?
There's a number of things we've been instructed by the district that we can use as decision points for diversity. One is, do you speak another language? Have you served in another country? Have you served at a college that is maybe Hispanic serving as an institution, or serves underserved populations as well? And those things are things that can come out in your application. category of comfort working in diverse settings or experience working in diverse settings.
And I think if
Also
you
the
are,
training, yeah.
if you're taking part in in that committee work, if you were showing, what that shows is a demonstrated interest in diversity is not just a box to check, but that you're actually doing it and you're trying to improve your teaching. So I think that participating in those types of things is absolutely something that would help nowadays as we're looking through the committee, or looking through the application. It would absolutely do that.
And Step Up is the Equity Action Institute, for
Yeah.
example, that's.
Unfortunately, that actually, they're only accepting the last report and.
Right, what I'm saying is for the future, I'm not saying, and generally, that's a positive.
Right. Preference faculty are only 2 spots for preference.
Adjunct faculty?
Yeah.
Organization affiliations, like if you're with, Justice League or NAACP or any sort of organizations that have a history of working with underserved populations, would also indicate a certain focus in your life on equity.
I would say that we also throughout the year have programs, our activities in CTL, Center for Teaching and Learning, that are related to both diversity and equity and contributing to that. If you have done those, definitely include them in that application. And also, when you come to interview, that's very important. Even if you said in the application, we've forgotten, that was like 2 months ago. Then when we go to the interview, we cannot use any of it. They are again scoring based on what you say that day. So even if you have it like, oh, I already wrote it there, but no, I tell candidates before they come into the room, like, okay, presume that we do not know anything because it has been a while, so we'll score only on what you say, so do not hold back. So definitely share. Even since your application, you've done something, add that in the interview.
There's a question here.
Oh, I just
And
want to.
let's take a question now, because we are running out.
Okay, all right.
I just have a question regarding for people who are not currently teaching, how do you find out about open application about
Jobs.losschools.edu.
But I know that the faculty senate approves them in the fall, and we're looking for something to get kind of just support.
You might want to ask your dean. I think your dean will be able to tell you, but Colleen's right. The best place to go to is Lowe's HR website /job. But your dean should be able to tell you as well. But your dean is going to be chairing the hiring committee.
No, the AVP. But the dean will be there.
But the dean will be there.
Dean will be there.
And the dean will have been participating in the creation of this.
Yeah, you don't see your AVP all the time, but you see your dean.
Yeah, you can ask
hopefully,
like that. They will know what positions have been approved.
I just want to address the question about equity because there is a whole bunch of flex activities
Yes, that's what I'm
revolving
talking about.
around Luke Wood's book.
Yeah.
So, if you just go to one of those, they would want you to buy the book and actually start reading the book, which is a part of the preparation, a part of getting to know what it is.
There's
I saw the workshops online, it conflicts with my teaching.
There's a book club that Jennifer Loveland is leading, and it meets like regularly. So that's something that you can try to join. Of course, you can also, for people who have an expertise in something, feel free to submit your workshop proposal to the CTL. That's one way to get recognized, for your expertise. This is a different topic now, not equity, but if you have something and some experience in equity in anything at all you want to share, submit your proposal to the CTL and present something that can be useful to the community, and that's your contribution, and that's what you can cite as how your involvement with the college and your college service. And you can earn double flex credit. Yes, you can earn double flex credit as a presenter.